There's an assassin living inside your mind, and Neville Goddard knew its name: uncontrolled imagination. This invisible killer doesn't use weapons or violence, but something far more devastating: the constant mental conversations you have with yourself that assume failure, limitation, and unworthiness. Every time you say, "I can't," "It's impossible," or "That's not for people like me," you're literally assassinating your own potential. Neville understood that your inner dialogue is not harmless mental chatter. These words are commands being delivered directly to your subconscious mind, which he called the faithful servant that never questions your orders. When you repeatedly think, "I'm always struggling," your subconscious accepts this as an instruction and faithfully creates circumstances that match this assumption. The tragedy is that most people spend decades slowly killing their dreams through toxic internal conversations. They rehearse poverty while hoping for wealth. They imagine rejection while desiring love. They assume failure while pursuing success. This mental habit of dwelling on what you don't want while claiming to want something different is what Neville called spiritual suicide, destroying your own good through misuse of imagination. Your thoughts are not just mental activities floating in your head. According to Neville, every assumption you accept as true about yourself becomes a seed planted in the fertile soil of consciousness. These seeds grow into the experiences of your life. Plant seeds of limitation, and you harvest a life of struggle. Plant seeds of abundance, and abundance must manifest. The invisible assassin isn't some external force working against you. It's your own uncontrolled imagination accepting negative assumptions as truth, then faithfully creating experiences that match those assumptions. But here's what Neville promised: the same power that creates what you don't want can be redirected to create what you do want. Neville Goddard revealed that your mind is not receiving reality. It's creating reality through the assumptions you hold about yourself and your world. What you call facts are actually hardened assumptions that have been repeated so many times they appear solid and unchangeable. Your brain isn't showing you what is, it's showing you what you believe is possible. Every day, you're manufacturing your own version of reality through the lens of your dominant assumptions. If you assume good things don't happen to me, your mind will filter out evidence of good things while amplifying proof that supports this belief. You're not seeing the world objectively, you're seeing a world that confirms your assumptions about what's possible for your life. Neville taught that imagination is the only reality, and what we call the physical world is just imagination crystallized into form. This means your current circumstances aren't permanent fixtures of reality, they're temporary crystallizations of past assumptions that can be dissolved and reformed through new assumptions. The most liberating truth Neville shared is that you're not stuck with inherited limitations or past failures. Every moment, you have the power to assume something new about yourself. The moment you truly accept, "I am prosperous," or "I am loved," as fact about yourself, reality has no choice but to reflect this new assumption back to you. Your brain becomes a factory producing experiences that match your inner conversations. Change the conversations, and you change the production line. This isn't positive thinking or wishful hoping. It's the fundamental law of consciousness that Neville spent his life teaching. Neville Goddard understood that limiting beliefs pass from generation to generation like inherited diseases, but he also taught the revolutionary truth: you have the power to break these generational chains through the conscious use of your imagination. The poverty consciousness of your ancestors doesn't have to become your poverty consciousness. Most people unconsciously inherit the assumptions of their families. If your parents believed money is hard to come by, you likely absorbed this assumption before you could walk or talk. If your family believed people like us don't succeed, this limitation became part of your mental programming. But Neville taught that these inherited assumptions are not permanent truths, they're just mental habits that can be changed. The mental virus of limitation spreads through repeated conversations about what's impossible, what's too difficult, what people like us can or cannot do. Children absorb these limiting assumptions as absolute truth about reality, never realizing they're just opinions that previous generations accepted without question. But here's what Neville promised: you are not condemned to repeat your family's limitations. The moment you begin to assume something greater for yourself, and persist in that assumption despite contrary evidence, you break the chain of limitation and plant new seeds for future generations. Neville called this revision, the practice of mentally rewriting your family's story of limitation into a story of abundance and possibility. When you assume, "I am the first in my family to prosper," you're not lying to yourself, you're claiming a new truth that your imagination has the power to make real. Neville Goddard taught that most people worship at the altar of their limitations, defending their problems with religious fervor. They create internal cults around beliefs like, "I'm not worthy," "success is for other people," or "I always struggle," and they protect these beliefs as if they were sacred truths rather than chosen assumptions. Listen to how passionately people defend their limitations. Challenge someone's belief that they can't do something, and they'll fight you with the intensity of a religious zealot. They don't realize they're defending assumptions they never consciously chose to accept. These limiting beliefs have become their false gods, demanding daily worship through negative internal conversations. Neville understood that when you identify with your limitations, you create what he called false states of consciousness. You don't just believe, "I am poor," you become someone whose identity is built around being poor. You don't just think, "I am unlucky," you become someone whose entire sense of self depends on being unlucky. The most dangerous aspect of these mental cults is that they demand sacrifice. They require you to sacrifice your dreams, your potential, your happiness to maintain loyalty to limiting beliefs. Every opportunity you refuse because, "That's not for me," is an offering on the altar of limitation. But Neville taught the path to freedom. Recognize that you are not your assumptions. You are the consciousness that has the power to choose which assumptions to accept as true. You can stop worshiping limitation and begin assuming the wish fulfilled instead. Inside your consciousness operates what Neville Goddard called the accuser, an internal voice that constantly judges, condemns, and finds you guilty of not being enough. This mental prosecutor has access to every mistake you've ever made, every moment of weakness, every time you fell short of your own expectations, and it uses this evidence to convince you that you don't deserve your heart's desires. Neville understood that this critical voice isn't your true self speaking. It's the echo of every person who ever made you feel inadequate, every authority figure who told you what you couldn't do, every disappointment that made you doubt your worth. Over time, these external voices became internalized, creating a hostile witness that lives inside your own mind. The internal court operates on false evidence. It judges you based on past actions and mistakes, never acknowledging that in consciousness, you have the power to be reborn in any moment. It treats temporary failures as permanent verdicts, never recognizing that every ending can become a new beginning through the power of assumption. What makes this mental court so destructive is that it blocks you from accepting your good. When opportunity appears, the internal judge declares you unworthy. When love presents itself, the accuser lists all the reasons you'll be rejected. When prosperity beckons, the critic recites your history of financial struggle as proof you don't deserve abundance. But Neville taught the ultimate truth that dissolves this internal tribunal. You are not your past. You are not your mistakes. You are pure consciousness with the power to assume any identity, any destiny, any reality you choose. The moment you accept "I am worthy" as truth about yourself, the internal accuser loses all power over you. Neville Goddard taught that most people live their entire lives imprisoned by their past, not realizing that memory is just imagination turned backward. Every time you relive an old hurt, replay a past failure, or rehearse an ancient disappointment, you're not remembering, you're recreating these experiences in your present moment consciousness. The past has no power over you except the power you give it through your attention and assumption. When you think, "I was rejected before, so I'll probably be rejected again," you're not being realistic, you're using your imagination to project past experiences into your future. You're assuming that what happened before must happen again. Neville understood that your subconscious mind cannot tell the difference between a memory and an assumption about the future. When you vividly remember past pain, your subconscious treats this as an order to create more experiences of the same frequency. You become addicted to reliving your old story because it feels familiar, even when it's painful. But here's what Neville promised. You have the power to revise your past through your imagination. Not by changing what happened, but by changing the meaning and power you give to past events. When you assume everything that happened to me was preparing me for my good, you transform your entire history from a story of limitation into a story of preparation for blessing. The most liberating practice Neville taught is living from the end, assuming your desire is already fulfilled and thinking from that state rather than toward it. When you consistently assume the wish fulfilled, the past loses its grip on you because you're no longer creating your future from your history. Your mind has appointed itself as a prophet of doom, constantly predicting disasters, failures, and disappointments that rarely come to pass. Neville Goddard understood that this mental fortune teller is not protecting you from danger, it's creating the very experiences it claims to warn you about through the power of assumption and expectation. Every worried thought is a negative prayer, a request sent to your subconscious mind to create circumstances that match your fears. When you consistently imagine, what if something goes wrong, you're not being prudent, you're using your creative power to assume and therefore attract the very problems you hope to avoid. Neville taught that your expectations are prophecies you make about your own future. If you expect rejection, you unconsciously behave in ways that invite rejection. If you expect failure, you make choices that lead to failure. If you expect limitation, you assume attitudes that create limited circumstances. The false prophet in your mind operates on the assumption that by imagining every possible catastrophe, you can prevent bad things from happening. But Neville understood that consciousness creates reality, not the other way around. Your fearful imaginings don't prevent problems, they manufacture them. But here's what Neville promised. You can transform from a prophet of doom into a prophet of blessing. Instead of asking, what if something goes wrong, ask, what if everything goes right? Instead of imagining failure, assume success. Instead of expecting the worst, assume the best. Your expectations will fulfill themselves either way. Choose expectations that serve your desires. Neville Goddard taught that you are not the limited person you think you are. Everything you believe about your identity, your capabilities, your worth, your possibilities, is just a collection of assumptions you've accepted as true about yourself. You're not defending your real self, you're defending a fictional character that your conditioned mind created. Most people live their entire lives wearing psychological masks that they mistake for their true identity. I'm not good with money, I'm unlucky in love, success isn't for people like me. These aren't facts about your nature. They're assumptions you've worn so long that they feel like permanent features of your personality. Neville understood that every limitation you accept about yourself becomes a mental prison. When you assume I am, followed by any limiting statement, you're not describing reality, you're creating it. The moment you truly accept I am prosperous, or I am loved, or I am successful, these assumptions begin to externalize as your lived experience. The tragedy is that you will unconsciously sabotage any good that doesn't match your accepted identity. If you see yourself as someone who struggles, you'll find ways to struggle even when abundance is available. If you identify as unlucky, you'll overlook opportunities and notice only obstacles. But Neville taught the most liberating truth. You have the power to choose a new identity in any moment. You are not your past, your mistakes, your current circumstances, or other people's opinions. You are infinite consciousness with the power to assume any identity and have it manifest as your reality. Neville Goddard taught that feeling is the secret, not positive thinking, not visualization, but the feeling of the wish fulfilled. Most people try to change their lives by changing their thoughts, but Neville understood that lasting transformation happens when you change the feeling from which you think. You don't think yourself into new feelings, you feel yourself into new thoughts. When you assume the feeling of being loved, thoughts of love naturally follow. When you assume the feeling of being prosperous, thoughts of abundance arise spontaneously. When you assume the feeling of being successful, confident thoughts become automatic. Neville taught that your current emotional state is not a reaction to your circumstances, it's the creative cause of your circumstances. If you feel unworthy, you create experiences that confirm unworthiness. If you feel grateful, you create experiences worth being grateful for. Your feeling state is literally the soil in which your experiences grow. The emotional hijacking happens when you allow external circumstances to determine your internal feeling state. You feel poor because your bank account is low, lonely because you're single, unsuccessful because you haven't achieved your goals. But Neville taught that this is backward thinking. Your feeling state should be determined by your desired end, not your current beginning. Here's what Neville promised. When you learn to assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled regardless of current circumstances, you become the conscious creator of your experience rather than its unconscious victim. Your feelings become your faithful servants rather than your tyrannical masters. Neville Goddard taught the ultimate truth that most people spend their lives avoiding. The world you see is the world you are. Your external experiences are not happening to you, they are projections of your internal assumptions made manifest in physical form. You are not a victim of your circumstances, you are their unconscious creator. Every person in your life is playing a role that corresponds to your assumptions about them and about yourself. The difficult boss, the unsupportive family member, the unreliable friend, they're all reflecting back to you your own states of consciousness. Change your assumptions about people, and their behavior toward you must change to match your new assumptions. Neville understood that you live in a world of infinite possibilities, but you only experience the possibilities that match your dominant assumptions. Two people can live in the same city, work in the same industry, have similar backgrounds, but experience completely different realities based on their different assumptions about what's possible for their lives. The personal matrix you've created through your assumptions feels absolutely real because consciousness is the only reality. Your limitations feel factual because you've assumed them to be true for so long. Your problems feel permanent because you've accepted them as unchangeable aspects of your reality. But here's what Neville promised. The same power of assumption that created your current reality can create an entirely new reality. You are not stuck with the world you see. You have the power to assume a new world and have it manifest as your lived experience. The matrix is only as permanent as your assumptions make it. After this journey through the unconscious patterns that have been ruling your life, you now understand what Neville Goddard spent decades teaching. You are not the victim of your mind, you are its master. The moment you recognize that you have been unconsciously using your imagination against yourself, you can begin consciously using it for yourself. Neville's ultimate revelation changes everything. You are not your thoughts, you are the consciousness that observes them. Think of your awareness like a vast, eternal screen. Thoughts, feelings, and experiences play across the screen like movies, but the screen itself is never changed, never damaged, never limited by what appears on it. You are that unlimited screen of consciousness, not the temporary content playing across it. This understanding is both humbling and empowering. Humbling because it means you have been creating many experiences you didn't want through unconscious assumptions. Empowering because it means you have the power to create any experience you do want through conscious assumption. Neville discovered that controlled imagination, assuming the wish fulfilled, is the master key that unlocks any door in your life. The technique Neville taught is elegantly simple. Instead of thinking from your current limitations, think from your fulfilled desires. Instead of assuming, I hope this happens, assume this has happened. Instead of feeling the lack of what you want, feel the satisfaction of having it. This is not pretending or positive thinking. This is conscious creation through assumption. Neville taught that any assumption, though false to your current senses, if persisted in until it feels natural, will harden into fact. This means every limitation in your life exists only because you've assumed it to be true. But any limitation can be dissolved by consistently assuming its opposite until the new assumption becomes your natural state. The promise Neville made is revolutionary. When you learn to assume the state of your fulfilled desire and persist in that assumption despite contrary evidence, your world must conform to your inner conviction. This is not magic. This is the fundamental law of consciousness. But understanding these principles intellectually won't transform your life. You must practice. You must persist. You must have the courage to assume you already are what you want to become, even when your senses argue otherwise. So here's what I'm asking you to do right now. If this message has awakened you to your own creative power, if you recognize that you've been unconsciously creating through assumption, if you're ready to become the conscious architect of your reality, then take action immediately. Hit that like button if you choose to assume responsibility for your inner conversations and the reality they create. Share this video with someone who needs to discover they are the operant power in their own life, someone ready to stop being the victim of unconscious assumption. Here's your practice. Tonight, before sleep, assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled. Don't visualize trying to get what you want, assume you already have it. Feel grateful for its fulfillment. Sleep in the assumption that it is already yours. Do this for 7 consecutive nights and watch your world begin to reflect your new assumption. Comment below with "I am the operant power" to claim your creative authority. Let's build a community of conscious creators who understand that we shape reality through assumption, not the other way around. Remember Neville's promise. Assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled and observe the route that your attention follows. You are not at the mercy of your circumstances. You are their unconscious creator becoming their conscious master. Today, your journey of deliberate creation begins.